The evening sky stretched endlessly above David and Emily, a canvas of twinkling stars casting their glow on the quiet meadow. They sat at a small table, surrounded by the soft hum of nature, far from the chaotic world. It was a rare moment of peace in their otherwise hectic lives. David, once a soldier who had seen too much violence, now found solace in these fleeting moments with Emily. She was his anchor, the person who made him feel human again. The candlelight flickered softly between them, casting gentle shadows across their faces. Emily, with her bright eyes and radiant smile, laughed at something David had said, her voice a melody that seemed to erase all the darkness that had followed him from his past. They had been together for a few years now, their relationship built on mutual respect, love, and a shared understanding of the world. David couldn't help but think about how lucky he was. After all, his life had been anything but normal. He had been a soldier, one of the best, but it wasn't the life he wanted anymore. His past, filled with combat and bloodshed, haunted him. He had left the military to find peace, to be with Emily, to live a life away from war. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As they finished their meal, the world around them seemed to freeze in a strange stillness. The peaceful night sky, once so comforting, now felt too quiet. Then, without warning, the silence shattered. A bright light cut through the sky like a slashing blade. The air vibrated with a strange hum that made David's instincts flare. He barely had time to process what was happening when the ground trembled beneath them. A fleet of alien ships, sleek and menacing, descended from the sky, blocking out the stars. Their shapes were unfamiliar, sharp, angular, and foreboding. They glowed with an eerie, unnatural light. The fleet was not just a few ships. It was a whole armada, each one larger than any craft David had ever seen. The moment the first ship touched down, a flash of intense light enveloped them. David barely had time to react as Emily was pulled into the air, her body rising from the ground, as if she was weightless. He reached out in a desperate attempt to grab her, but the force of the light was too strong, and within seconds, she was gone, disappeared. David's heart pounded in his chest as the reality of the situation hit him like a sledgehammer. He stood frozen for a moment, unable to believe what he had just seen. His mind raced. How could this be happening? Who were these beings? Why Emily? The sound of the alien ships powering up brought him back to the present. David snapped into action, running toward the nearest ship. He felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that had once kept him alive in countless battles. But this time, the stakes were different. This time, it wasn't a mission, it was personal. He tried to make sense of the situation, to understand what he was up against. His eyes searched the sky, looking for any signs of the enemy, but all he could see was the chaotic descent of more alien ships. They were here. They had come for a reason. But what reason could they have for taking Emily? She was just a civilian, a human. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp, cold voice coming from above. It wasn't human, but it was clear enough to understand. The voice, robotic and emotionless, declared, "The subject has been acquired. Prepare for transport." David's blood ran cold. Emily was already aboard one of the ships. Without thinking, he sprinted toward the nearest building, the one that housed his hidden stash of military equipment. He had once been part of a special unit, one of the government's best-kept secrets. He had trained with the most advanced technology, learned combat tactics that were designed to take down the most formidable foes. But he had left that life behind. Until now. As he reached the hidden compartment, David's fingers trembled as he unlocked the stash. Inside, he found the weapons and gear he hadn't touched in years. His tactical armor, energy blades, and his old combat suit. He grabbed everything with urgency, knowing that the clock was ticking. Emily needed him, and he wouldn't let her down. While he suited up, memories of his past flooded his mind. His training had been brutal, designed to break him and rebuild him into a weapon. He had fought in wars, faced enemies that were far more advanced than humans could imagine. But it wasn't just the combat that haunted him. It was the losses, the comrades he had lost along the way. People who had been there, fighting by his side, but were now nothing more than echoes in his mind. And now, Emily was at risk of becoming another lost soul. The words hung in the air like a strange, foreign concept. She had never expected this. She had thought all humans were the same, brutal, savage. But here was one, standing in front of her, offering her care and compassion instead of pain. She didn't know what to make of it. Was this just a tactic, a way to break her spirit before her execution? Or was this soldier truly different from the rest of his kind? Her mind raced, trying to process the confusion swirling inside her. Could this really be happening? Was it possible that a human soldier, a killer in the eyes of her people, could offer her kindness? As the soldier continued tending to her, the princess couldn't help but wonder what it all meant. Could the stories she had been told about humans be wrong? Was there more to them than she had been led to believe? She found herself looking at him, not as an enemy, but as someone different, someone she couldn't understand. The silence between them grew, but it was no longer uncomfortable. There was a strange, quiet understanding in the air. She didn't know what would happen next, but in that moment, she realized something profound. Not all humans were the monsters she had been taught to fear. There was more to them than just the stories. And perhaps, just perhaps, the soldier standing before her was proof of that. As the door to the cell slid closed behind him, leaving her alone once more, the princess was left with a single thought, a thought that would change everything. She wasn't sure what it meant, but she knew one thing for certain. She had just encountered a human unlike any she had ever imagined. Days passed since the human soldier's unexpected act of kindness, and with each new day, the princess found herself more and more puzzled by him. She had been prepared for cruelty, for violence, for the kind of brutality her people had always associated with humans. Yet here she was, in a cold cell, with nothing but silence and her thoughts. And still, that soldier's actions lingered in her mind, refusing to be forgotten. The princess had always been taught that humans were heartless creatures, merciless killers who destroyed anything they couldn't control. But this soldier, this man who attended to her wounds with such care, didn't fit the image she had been raised to believe in. She had to know more, but the opportunity to speak to him never seemed to come. The guards who watched over her were silent and cold, only delivering her food and water, never saying a word. No one came to visit her except for him. And when he did, it was always when the rest of the camp was asleep, when the world seemed to pause around them. One night, as the moonlight spilled into the room through the small barred window, she heard the familiar footsteps again, heavy, purposeful, and unmistakably human. Her heart beat a little faster in her chest as she realized who it was. He was here again, the soldier who had been so different from the rest. The princess braced herself, her mind racing with questions. Why was he coming back? Was he here to finish the job? Or perhaps was it something else? Her instincts told her to stay alert, but curiosity gnawed at her. The door to her cell creaked open quietly, and once again the soldier stepped inside. This time, however, there was a different air about him. His posture was still firm, his movements still measured, but there was something in his eyes, a distant look, like he was carrying a weight much heavier than what he showed. He wasn't here for battle, for violence, or even to continue what they had started. He was simply here, as if his presence alone meant something more than words could express. He didn't speak at first, only looked at her with a quiet understanding, as if searching for something in her expression. For a long moment, neither of them said a word. The princess, though she was filled with questions, held them all back. Something about the silence felt different this time, as if the air between them was thick with secrets, secrets that neither of them could yet share. Finally, it was the soldier who broke the silence. "You've been asking questions," he said softly, his voice low and tinged with something that almost sounded like regret. "I can see it in your eyes." The princess was stunned. How could he know? She had barely spoken to him at all since their first encounter, but there was no mistaking the truth in his words. He could see right through her, and for the first time, she felt vulnerable in a way she hadn't expected. Vulnerable not because she was a prisoner, but because the human soldier, this man who was supposed to be her enemy, seemed to understand her in a way that no one else ever had. She didn't know what to say, but her curiosity couldn't be contained anymore. "Why do you help me?" she asked, her voice quieter than before. "Why not just let me die like the others?" As Elias moved closer to the Sarvok soldier, he could hear the soft, mechanical hum of their cloaking devices, the subtle sound of their technology working to hide their movements. But Elias was ready. He had been trained for moments like this, where stealth and surprise were the only tools available. His hand tightened around the grip of his blaster, the cold metal offering a sense of purpose. In a swift motion, Elias pulled himself up from behind the wall and fired. The blast rang out, the energy bolt striking the Sarvok soldier in the chest. The force of the shot sent the massive creature stumbling backward, its heavy armor sparking as it fell. But it didn't go down without a fight. The other Sarvok soldiers nearby snapped to attention, their eyes glowing red beneath their helmets. They raised their weapons, aiming at Elias with deadly precision. Elias didn't hesitate. He dove to the side, rolling into cover behind a pile of debris. The air was filled with the sound of blaster fire, the crackling energy bolts zipping past him. He could feel the heat of the blasts as they grazed the air around him. But he kept moving, his body trained for moments like this. The Sarvok soldiers were relentless. They didn't stop. They didn't hesitate. But Elias wasn't about to give up. He had a reason to fight now, something more than just the survival of the colony. He had a purpose. He had to make them pay. As the battle raged on, Elias felt a strange sense of clarity. The war that had never been had now begun. The Sarvok had invaded, thinking they could conquer this world without resistance. They had thought humanity was weak, divided, easy to crush. But Elias knew better. Humanity might be broken, scattered, and vulnerable, but it wasn't gone. Not yet. And the Sarvok were about to find out just how wrong they were. In the chaos of the fight, Elias found himself surrounded by a handful of survivors, men and women who had managed to escape the first wave of the invasion. They were a mix of civilians and former soldiers, all of them scared and desperate. But as Elias turned to them, his voice steady, his eyes burning with determination, he saw something shift in their expressions. Fear was replaced with resolve. "We fight together," Elias said, his voice carrying across the small group. "We've lost everything today, but we haven't lost our will to fight. This is our home, and we will make them regret coming here." The survivors nodded, some of them still trembling, but all of them willing to take up arms. Elias knew they were no match for the power of the Sarvok army, but there was something they had that the invaders didn't. Heart. And heart could do things that technology and weapons couldn't. The battle continued as Elias and his ragtag group fought their way through the remains of the colony. Every corner turned, every firefight fought, brought them closer to the heart of the Sarvok invasion force. And with every step, Elias could feel the anger building inside him. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for his son, for the countless lives lost in this senseless attack. He was fighting for revenge, and he wasn't alone. The Sarvok would soon learn that humanity might have been silent for too long, but now they had awakened. The war that had never been was here, and it would be one the invaders would never forget. The deeper Elias and his small group pushed into the enemy's territory, the more the destruction around them grew. The colony, once filled with the hum of everyday life, was now a graveyard of twisted metal and burnt-out buildings. The air was thick with smoke, and the distant cries of those still trapped echoed in the night. Yet Elias didn't stop. His legs ached, his body screamed for rest, but he kept moving. Every step was another reminder of what the Xarvok had done, what they had taken. His group was small, just a handful of survivors. They were untrained, just ordinary people trying to survive, but Elias could see the fire in their eyes. They were fighting not just for survival, but for revenge. Each of them had lost someone, a friend, a family member, a child. They didn't know it yet, but they were becoming soldiers. They were becoming a force that Xarvok would have to reckon with. The heart of the Xarvok invasion force was still ahead. Elias knew that if they could get to it, they could strike a crippling blow. The Xarvok had set up a large command center at the center of the colony, heavily fortified and protected by layers of advanced technology. If they could destroy it, they could send a message that humanity wasn't going to roll over. Not anymore. Someone to watch her back, someone to fight with. And in this desolate world, that was the most important thing of all. Together, they would face whatever horrors this new world had in store for them. The forest grew darker with every passing minute, the thick canopy above casting long, twisted shadows on the uneven ground. Zara and Liam moved cautiously, their senses alert to the slightest noise, the faintest rustle of leaves or crack of a twig beneath their feet. Despite the quiet, there was an underlying tension in the air. The atmosphere felt heavy, like something dangerous was lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. Liam adjusted his grip on his blaster, his eyes scanning the surroundings. He had fought in many battles, but this place was unlike anything he had encountered before. There were no familiar signs of civilization, no markers of where the enemy might be, just trees, rocks, and the ever-present feeling that they were being watched. Zara was a few steps ahead, her movements graceful and fluid, as if she had become one with the forest. She was used to this, used to being surrounded by danger, always prepared for the unexpected. "We need to keep moving," Zara said, her voice steady, but there was a hint of urgency in it. "The beasts aren't the only things we need to worry about out here." Liam frowned. "Beasts. I've seen the creatures in this place. They're vicious, sure, but what else could there be?" Zara glanced back at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "It's not just the animals. There are others here. I don't know who or what they are, but I've seen signs, tracks, broken branches, footprints that don't belong to any creature I've ever known. And I'm not taking any chances." Liam nodded, the gravity of her words sinking in. It wasn't just the physical dangers they had to worry about. It was the unknown forces that might be stalking them from the shadows. He couldn't deny that he had seen enough to know that this world was far from ordinary. But the idea of other beings, humanoid or otherwise, made his skin crawl. They had to stay alert. They walked in silence for a while, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick underbrush. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional call of a distant bird or the whisper of wind through the trees. But just when Liam thought they might finally get a moment of peace, a strange sound shattered the stillness. A low growl, deep and guttural, echoed through the trees. Zara's body tensed immediately, her posture shifting as she moved into a defensive stance. "Get down," she hissed, her voice urgent. Liam didn't hesitate. He dropped to the ground beside her, his hand instinctively reaching for his blaster. The growl came again, closer this time, and then he heard something that made his blood run cold. The sound of something large moving through the underbrush, snapping branches as it approached. Zara held up her hand, signaling for him to stay quiet. She was listening, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness. Then, without warning, she turned to him and whispered, "It's coming. Stay close, and stay quiet." Liam nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. Whatever it wasn't friendly. The growl was unmistakable, a sound that spoke of a creature far beyond anything he had encountered in his years as a soldier. He could feel the tension in the air, a kind of oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. From the corner of his eye, Liam saw movement. It was quick, too quick, And before he could even process what was happening, Zara had already moved. She was a blur of motion, her body fluid as she darted forward, her hand reaching for a dagger strapped to her thigh. The growl became louder, more distinct, and then it emerged from the shadows. An enormous creature, its eyes glowing a deep red, its body covered in dark, matted fur. Liam didn't have time to think. The beast lunged at Zara, its jaws snapping wide open, but she was faster. She sidestepped the attack with practiced ease, her blade flashing in the dim light as it cut through the air. The creature let out a roar of pain, but it wasn't deterred. It swung its massive claws at her, but she was already gone, disappearing into the underbrush, only to reappear on the other side, ready for her next strike. The door slowly creaked open, revealing a dark hallway beyond. Luke felt his heart race. Something was coming. But no matter what it was, he knew that the Gorth wouldn't let him face it alone. They were connected now, for better or for worse, and in that connection, Luke found an unexpected strength. For the first time since his capture, Luke knew that he wasn't completely powerless. The creature at his side, his protector, would stand with him. And together, they would face whatever came next. The air felt electric as the door to the holding area slowly opened, revealing the dimly lit corridor beyond. Luke could feel his pulse quicken, his breath shallow with anticipation. The Gorth's muscles tensed beside him, its eyes narrowing as it carefully examined the hallway. There was something lurking in the shadows. He could feel it, the presence of something unknown and dangerous. But Luke wasn't as afraid as he thought he would be. The Gorth was there, standing guard like an impenetrable wall, and somehow that gave Luke the strength to face whatever was about to happen. The soldiers hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. They had seen the Gorth's protective stance, but the real question was, what had made it change? It was a creature bred for destruction, designed to obey only the harshest commands, yet here it was, standing between Luke and the alien forces that wanted him dead. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, weapons drawn, but none of them made a move. Luke felt the weight of their stares on him, but he focused on the corridor ahead. The faint hum of machinery echoed down the dark hallway, and he could hear the soft scurrying sounds of something moving just out of sight. He had no idea what was coming, but he knew one thing for sure. The Gorth wouldn't let anyone harm him. The silence stretched on, broken only by the occasional hiss of air from the ventilation system. The Gorth's growl was low, almost a whisper, but it was enough to make the soldiers take a step back. Luke didn't know if the creature's instincts had told it to protect him or if something deeper was at play. But in that moment, it felt like the two of them were linked by something powerful. The Gorth wasn't just an animal. It was something more. And as much as Luke wanted to understand it, he knew he had to focus on the immediate danger. Suddenly, a sharp metallic sound echoed down the hallway, followed by the heavy footsteps of something or someone approaching. Luke's heart skipped a beat. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet remained frozen in place. The Gorth stood firm, its eyes locked on the source of the noise, ready to act. Luke glanced around frantically. There was nowhere to hide. The only thing he could do was stay close to the creature and hope it would protect him. Out of the darkness, a figure emerged. It was tall, humanoid in shape but clearly alien, with glowing red eyes and sleek black armor. Luke could tell immediately that it wasn't one of the soldiers he had seen earlier. This was someone higher up, someone with power. The alien stopped just a few feet away, its piercing gaze locking with Luke's. For a moment, there was a strange stillness between them, as if the air itself had been held in suspense. Luke didn't know what to do. Should he speak? Should he beg for mercy? But the Gorth stepped forward, its massive body blocking Luke from view. The alien glanced at the creature, then back at Luke, and for a brief moment, there was an unreadable expression on its face. Luke could see the wariness in its posture. This was no ordinary soldier. It knew that the Gorth wasn't to be taken lightly. You shouldn't be here, the alien said, its voice low but firm. There was a coldness to its words, but Luke didn't flinch. He stood his ground, not because he was brave, but because something in him, the connection with the Gorith, gave him courage. The alien's gaze flicked to the Gorith, then back to Luke, narrowing with suspicion. What is this? How did you? The words trailed off, replaced by a flash of realization. It knew something was wrong. Something was happening that couldn't be explained. The Gorith, an apex predator designed for war, was behaving strangely, and it was guarding a human child. Something that had never happened before. I remember how it used to be. The cities, the people, the technology. There was so much life here before everything fell apart. Liam was stunned. He had thought Zara had grown up in this wilderness, but it seemed she was from a time long before the apocalypse. It made sense, though. Her skills, her survival instincts, they weren't just from living in this hostile environment. She had once known a world where civilization thrived, where the very things that had destroyed it now seemed like distant memories. He couldn't even begin to imagine what that must have been like for her. You remember? Liam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara nodded slowly. I do, but those memories are fading. Sometimes I can still see the cities in my mind, the tall buildings and the lights, but they're slipping away, lost to time. All that's left now is this. Liam didn't know what to say. He had always thought of the apocalypse as something distant, something that had happened long before his time. But for Zara, it was a living memory, a world she had lost and would never see again. He felt a pang of sympathy for her, but he also felt a deep sense of determination. Whatever had caused the fall of this world, whatever had brought it to its knees, it had to be stopped. He couldn't let it happen again, not if there was a chance to change the future. There has to be something we can do, Liam said, his voice filled with conviction. We can't just let this place die. There's got to be a way to fix it. Zara's expression softened, and she turned to face him. I used to believe that. I thought we could rebuild, that we could restore what was lost. But after everything I've seen, I'm not so sure anymore. The world we knew is gone, Liam. It's been replaced by something darker, something far more dangerous. There are forces at work here that we don't even begin to understand. Liam's mind raced. What could she mean? What forces were out there, beyond the beasts and the wilderness? As they walked deeper into the forest, the feeling of unease only grew stronger. There was something hidden here, something buried beneath the earth, waiting to be discovered. He could feel it in his bones. Without warning, Zara stopped in her tracks, her body tense, her eyes scanning the area. Do you hear that? Liam strained his ears. At first, he heard nothing but the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. But then, faintly, he heard a low hum, a rhythmic vibration that seemed to pulse through the ground itself. It was coming from somewhere ahead, deep in the heart of the forest. What is that? Liam asked, his voice tight with curiosity and fear. I don't know, Zara replied, her tone grim. But I heard it before. It's a signal, an energy source of some kind. It's not natural, Liam. It's artificial. Liam's heart skipped a beat. Artificial? You mean like technology. But everything here is supposed to be destroyed. Zara interrupted. Yes, that's what we were meant to believe. But it's a lie. The technology didn't just disappear. It's buried, hidden, waiting for someone to find it. And if we're hearing it now, that means it's still active. The idea of technology still being out there, something that had survived the apocalypse, sent a chill down Liam's spine. What kind of technology could have survived such a catastrophe? And why was it still broadcasting a signal, calling out to anyone who would listen? Without another word, Zara began moving toward the source of the hum, her movements cautious but purposeful. Liam followed close behind, his thoughts racing. What was the truth behind the apocalypse? What had caused it? And what was this technology that had survived, seemingly untouched by the devastation? As they drew closer, the hum grew louder, more distinct. They were almost there, but the closer they got, the more Liam felt a sense of dread settle in his chest. Whatever was ahead, it was something far beyond anything they had encountered so far. It wasn't just a threat to their survival. It was a reminder that there were forces out there that could change everything. Forces that could unravel the fragile hope they had left. Finally, they arrived at the source of the hum. Hidden beneath the thick underbrush, covered in vines and debris, was something that looked like a massive metal structure, part of a long-forgotten machine, a relic of the old world. Its surface was pitted and scorched, but it was still alive, still pulsing with energy, its lights flickering faintly in the fading light. Zora crouched beside it, her hand brushing against the surface. "This is it," she whispered, awe and fear in her voice. "This is what I've been searching for. This is the key to everything." Blending into the jungle like phantoms, the princess's breath caught in her throat as she recognized them. They were from her own faction, her people, but something was wrong. The faces hidden beneath the helmets were cold, their eyes devoid of emotion. There was no mercy in their movements, no hesitation. Just cold, calculated efficiency. The soldier fired first, instinctively, taking down two of the attackers in a flash of brilliant light. But the others were too fast, closing the distance between them with unnatural speed. The soldier gritted his teeth, trying to protect the princess, but the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. The princess, watching in horror as the soldiers advanced, realized the truth too late. Her people, her own faction, had betrayed them. The soldier was right to distrust her. This was no random attack. They were here for her, for him, for both of them. "Get back," the soldier yelled, his voice desperate, his eyes wild. He shoved the princess behind him again, but she resisted, her hands gripping his arm. She couldn't leave him. Not now. Not after everything they had been through together. But the soldier was a man of action, not words, and his desperation was clear. He couldn't afford to think about her safety. Not anymore. But it wasn't the soldiers who broke her resolve. It was the voice. The voice that rang out from the shadows, cold and filled with authority. "Stop," the voice commanded. "Lower your weapons." From behind the soldiers stepped a woman, tall and regal in her posture, her face obscured by a dark visor. But the princess knew her instantly. It was Commander Celine, her own superior, the woman who had mentored her, trained her, and given her everything she thought she knew about loyalty. But the look in Celine's eyes was not the one she had known. There was no warmth, no connection, just cold, impassive calculation. "Celine," the princess whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Her heart was racing, the betrayal sinking deep into her chest. The woman who had once been her mentor, the one she had trusted above all others, was now the one standing against them. And it was clear there was no going back. The soldier glanced at the princess, his eyes narrowing. This was a setup, wasn't it? He growled, his grip tightening on his weapon. "You were never in danger, were you?" The princess's eyes flickered towards Celine, her heart heavy with the realization. She had been played. They had both been played. The princess had thought that her people, her faction, were still fighting for what was right. She had been so sure that she was on the right side of the war. But now she saw the truth. There was no honor left. No truth, just power. The same power that had destroyed everything she once believed in. "I'm sorry," the princess whispered, her voice breaking. The words felt like a weight on her chest. She had trusted her. She had trusted Celine to protect her, to guide her. And now she had betrayed everything they had fought for. Celine's lips twisted into a cruel smile. "Sorry," she repeated. "You have no idea, do you? You never understood the game. It was never about loyalty. It was always about power." The princess felt a wave of nausea roll through her. She had been so naive, so certain that everything would make sense once the war was won. But now, all of that seemed like a distant memory. Nothing mattered anymore. Not the war. Not the loyalty. Not even the soldier who had been nothing but a means to an end in her eyes just days before. And yet now, as she stood there, facing the soldiers, facing her mentor, the woman who had been the one constant in her life for so long, she realized just how much she had changed. How much the soldier had changed her. He had shown her a different side of the world, a side she had never seen before. And now, as she faced the truth, as the weight of betrayal settled on her shoulders, she knew there was no turning back. "Take her," Celine commanded coldly, "and leave him."